Today, I think we already finished 17 of Ramadan. Today, 15? I think 15, and then we are now on the night of 16. 16, oh, sorry, yeah, 16. So, inshallah, another 2 weeks to go. May Allah keep bless us until the end of this Ramadan.
Selfie. Okay, we start inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa kafa wa salatu wa salamu ala ibadi alladhina istafa. My dearest brothers and sisters in the future of this beautiful community, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Aba kabar, aba kabar. Alhamdulillah, mashallah, mashallah. So the topic is called emotional intelligence of a Muslim. Now that sounds like a meaty term, especially for the young kids, but we will explain it in a way that inshallah makes sense to all the different age groups in front of me, and everybody is young at heart, inshallah. Okay, so as the MC alluded to, we're past the halfway point of Ramadan. Now we just want to pause here and consciously have an exercise for about 10 seconds. We're just going to close your mind and think, what have I achieved in the first 15 days? Just for a brief 10 seconds, just close your eyes or switch off your mind and just think to yourself, what have you achieved? Or what can you remember? This is the question. What can you remember you have achieved in these last 15 days? Okay. The reason why I start with this question is that one aspect of emotional intelligence for a Muslim is derived from the fundamental principle of being consciously present when you are worshipping and when you are living. I'll explain it in a different way. We all right now, one way or another, feel how fast life is going. We all feel how fast life is going. So the week drags on to a month, drags on to 6 months, drags on to a year, Ramadan to Ramadan. It's running away so fast, we cannot remember what we've done. It's running away so fast, we can't remember what we've done. And so when you ask people, Muslims or non-Muslims, who are living in what we call right now the rat race, what can you remember you have actually achieved that stands up to your memory, as in you can actually consciously remember it? And surprisingly, not many people can actually recall something of significance. The majority of us are sort of flowing through life. And this is important to remember, my dear brothers and sisters. There's a very big difference between a human being that is living through life, and there's a very different human being who is living in life. There's a difference between a human being that is living just through life, habitually, and there's a human being that is actually living in life in the present, living, making the most of now, and preparing for the future. Now, why do I say this? Because in Islam, what is the first thing that you do to declare your faith? We will say, Ashhadu Allah. What does Ashhadu mean? I bear witness. Now, this is significant for the psychology of Muslim, because you cannot be a witness if you are not present. You cannot be a witness if you are not present physically and psychologically. Let's explain it in lawyer terms. You could be physically present at the crime of the place of an incident, but you can't remember. You can't remember. And the judge says, were you there? And you're like, yeah, I was there. And the judge will say, what did you see? And you say, I can't remember. And at that moment, your testimony or your witnessship between brackets is void because you were not consciously present at that moment. I'll give you another example from the basics of Islam. What is the first hadith that you read in all the hadith books when you open them? First hadith is إنما الأعمال بالنيات. إنما الأعمال بالنيات. To make an intention, to get the reward of the deed, you have to make the intention. To make the intention, you have to be consciously aware of what you're intending to do. And if you're not consciously aware of what you're intending to do, and you do it habitually, there's a very high chance that your act will not be accepted. Because Allah is not interested in physical movements. Allah is not interested in you just abstaining from the outside food and drink and so on. Allah is actually interested, on top of that, fundamentally, is are you consciously aware of what you're doing? That's why in the hadith of Ramadan, and we all heard the hadith that we say, Man sama Ramadan, imanan wa ihtisaba. So, whoever fasts Ramadan, with iman and ihtisab. What does ihtisab mean? Accounting the good deeds that you're wanting, accounting what you are doing, being conscious of what you're asking for. Only then will Allah forgive the sins that have gone. So it's no fluke. The Prophet said, Man sama Ramadan, imanan wa ihtisaba, ghufira lahu ma taqaddama min dhanbihi. He didn't just say, Man sama Ramadan. He could have said that, he could have. You abstain from food and drink, and all your sins are forgiven. He could have said that. He didn't. He said, whoever fasts Ramadan with iman, and we can talk a lot about that aspect with faith, but most importantly, what we're focusing on is ihtisab. Consciously aware of what you are doing. Like you could be praying Tarawih. You could be praying Tarawih, and you could be just listening to the Imam and going through the motions. Or you could be praying Tarawih, and in your mind, you're doing the following. I am reading the Sunnah of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. I'm praying at night in the month of Ramadan. Allah asks for the reward. Ya Allah, even if I don't understand Arabic or what the Imam is saying, I know there's barakah in me standing here. In your mind, you're consciously counting the numerous avenues of reward that are available for you. So these two brothers, these two sisters that are praying next to each other, on the outside, they look like they're exactly doing the same thing. But what's happening consciously is making the difference in their scale of books. That's what's making the difference. So this brother or this sister that's making the intention for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 from the one prayer, and this second brother or sister will just go through the motions. The reward in the book is very, very different. But you have to be consciously aware. So part of emotional intelligence of a Muslim that's specific to Ramadan, that we've just discussed, is to be consciously aware of what you're going through. Why is this important? Because now we're past the halfway point of Ramadan. And between brackets, Ramadan, how should I say, the plateau phase is in motion now, where everybody started with a hiss and a roar. And now the middle 10 days, just getting a bit tired mentally, you go through the motions. And subconsciously, you want to reserve your energy for the last 10 days. But that's not the way it's supposed to be. You're meant to be going through it every single moment. Boys, can we stop playing with the bottles, please? Can you stop playing with the bottles? So this is a fundamental thing for us going forward the next 15 days. Every day is an opportunity. Every second in Ramadan is an opportunity. And this is not asking too much of you. This is asking you just to make the intention and to be consciously aware. I'll make the best of what I can do, given the context. I was talking to a brother yesterday from another congregation, and he was very upset that because of his work situation or his work context, he cannot take the last 10 days off. And so he feels that he's missing out on the last 10 days because he's not going to be able to pray all night and then rock up to work the next day for 10 days straight. That's humanly, physically impossible. So what I explained to the brother, which I thought was very, very actually relevant to everybody, is that when you're fasting, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, not just about fasting, but about every worship, is لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Now, we think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just going to, ask us to do the maximum and we will push to the maximum. But the actual meaning is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will only look at how much you've done given the context that He's given you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will look how much you've maximized your time given the context that He's given you. Because He's the provider of the rizq and the sustenance. And some of us could be working in industries, we have the luxury to have time off. Some of us don't have the luxury. But do we change the priorities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because first and foremost, mums are mums and dads are dads. Dads are providers, they have to work, they have to put food on the table. It is not in the sunnah of Ramadan for you to stop working to increase your worship. That's not the sunnah. You can reprioritize other things in your life that you can control, but working to provide for a family is an act of worship. It is not, as we have unfortunately labeled it in our psychology, dunya rubbish. It's not. Seeking provision, halal, for your family, every second of it could be multiple rewards. Being a mother for your children and cooking for those that are fasting and doing whatever you do in your motherhood in the manner that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is an act of worship. The difference is in our psychology, are we consciously accounting it as an act of worship and getting the good deeds or not? This is the difference. So if you can't take time off the last 10 days, don't sit and cry and moan about it and be miserable. During the day you're working for the sake of your family, make the most of what you can at night, consciously accounting what you can do. And remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the giver of the reward. It's not you who's measuring the reward based on your physical effort. We tend to sort of extrapolate our thinking as human beings and paste it to how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives reward. That's not true. We think in human beings that the more effort, the more reward. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala works from different caliber. Very, very different caliber, very, very different formula. Like for example, Prophet ﷺ said in authentic hadith, whoever prays Isha in Jama'ah, it's as if they've prayed half the night. And whoever prays Fajr in Jama'ah, it's as if they prayed the whole night. Who's saying this? Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Can Prophet ﷺ talk about scales of reward if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't tell it? No. So how is it that in the last 10 days of Ramadan, we give more emphasis to Tarawih and Tahajjud more than Isha and Fajr? It doesn't make sense. That's not the priority. So if you're working and you cannot do Tahajjud or Qiyam al-Layl, at the very least, pray Isha and Fajr in Jama'ah, you'll get the reward. But don't think of it as physical effort is reward. Think of it as, am I following what Prophet ﷺ has told me to do in order to get the reward? And this is a test for you as a Muslim, because you are, by definition, you submit. You submit to what Allah and His Messenger have told you to do. And you seek reward by the avenues that they've told you to seek reward. Not what you feel is like, not what your culture is telling you, not what your granddads and your grandmothers and your ancestors have done. Make that distinction very, very clear. So in the next 15 days, as the physical fatigue starts to accumulate and life doesn't stop for you, don't feel down and low because you cannot achieve maximum physical effort. Look to maximize what you can do in your own specific context. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't compare you to others. Allah just looks at you and sees, have you done the best given the context that He has given you? Emotional intelligence, point number 1. Emotional intelligence, point number 2, is that in our psyche, there's a very, very strong masculine philosophy associated with men, that they cannot express emotions, that they have to be bulletproof, and anybody who expresses emotions is almost a wimp, dare I say it. Now, let's look at that philosophy that's prevalent right now in our culture and our psyche, and what is the emotional intelligence of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When I refer to the word emotional intelligence, what am I talking about? Put it in a nutshell, you have people who are book smart and you have people who are life smart, people smart. You will find that the book smart people may have their degrees on the wall, but they're not necessarily the most sociable. They're not necessarily the ones that are able to form relationships, and they're certainly not the ones that can influence change in people just by being book smart. In order to form relationships, in order to influence the hearts of people, you have to be people smart and life smart. That's what emotional intelligence in a nutshell is. Is you, on top of being book smart, having the knowledge, having the skills to relate to people and change their hearts. And that was the magic of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That was his magic. And I don't think magic isn't like the magic, but that was the prophetic touch. In that he was book smart between brackets, and he had the revelation. That was miraculous. But he had to deliver it. He had to deliver it to the hearts of very stubborn, proud, how should I say, brick-headed Arabs. And I'm an Arab and I can say that. And that's our nature. Allah has created people differently. That's our nature. And that's the nature of people who live in tough, rough climates in the desert. They tend to be very, very stubborn, very, very proud, and very, very hard to influence and change. They just follow their pathways regardless. So much so that it's mentioned in the Quran that إِنَّا وَجَدْنَا آبَاءَنَا عَلَىٰ أُمَّةٍ وَإِنَّ عَلَىٰ آثَارِهِمْ لَمُقْتَدُونَ. That we will follow the path of our fathers and our ancestors, regardless of how well it looks. Some people will follow blindly, know that it's wrong, but it's just the tradition they follow. So that was the environment at that time. The people that Prophet ﷺ was dealing with were those people. And mashallah, the Indo-Malaysian community is very, very soft-hearted, very accepting, very, very polite. The Arabs are different. The Arabs are very different. So how did Prophet ﷺ manage to tame these beasts and turn them to be the most elegant, the most respectful, the most influential generation in the entire history of humanity? And that was his emotional intelligence. So Prophet ﷺ was able to pierce the hearts through the skills that we've shared today. Some of the skills we've sort of determined and deciphered from studying the Sunnah, and some of the skills is by the miracles that he had with his hands and the revelations of the Quran. But nonetheless, if I give you an example of the opposite, you'll see the picture. You have a phenomenon right now where, with all respect, there's a lot of hikam, Sadiq, there's a lot of preachers who know their book, who know the theory, but do not know how to deliver the message to the hearts. And there's a problem. You cannot be book smart and expect just because you know the knowledge that people will receive it. It doesn't work like that. You need to have the knowledge, but you need to have the skill to unlock the hearts for them to receive the message. Because the message is not designed to be taken from book to book or from mouth to mouth. It goes from heart to heart. It goes from heart to heart. And that requires effort. That requires forming relationships. That requires time and patience. And that's what Prophet ﷺ had. And you see that so many times. And so when you as a Muslim, or you as a Muslim, or you as a Sheikh have no patience for your spouse, you have no patience for your kids, you have no patience with those that are going astray in the community, you've misunderstood the prophetic message. Because unlocking people's hearts is not easy. It requires time and effort. But when you unlock the hearts, you will unleash the potential. And as Prophet ﷺ has said, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides by your hand one person, it is better for you than humur al-ni'am. Humur al-ni'am is a word that's in Arabic. It's sort of open-ended, never-ending reward kind of thing. But only you can get through that, being patient and unlocking the heart. So emotional intelligence, let's get to some tools now. We've talked about it. You can summarize it in an acronym That's very well documented if you want to study the topic of emotional intelligence. It's not a Muslim-specific area. It's very, very well documented that emotional intelligence is the key to changing people, and it is done by people with good intention, and it is done by people with bad intentions. The art of changing people is well understood. So first thing is that you have to recognize your own emotions. And emotional intelligence works on two dimensions. It works on your own personal level, so your own emotional intelligence. And then once you've conquered and understood your own emotional intelligence, you can conquer and understand the intrapersonal emotional intelligence. You start to be able to recognize what people, and people are different, and they will be different to you. We love to have everybody like us, don't we? We wish that everybody is on the same page. It will make life a lot easier. But it's not. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a hikmah and a wisdom in making people different. Because if everybody was just interested in science, nothing else will flourish. If everybody was interested in sport, nothing else will flourish. If everybody was angry, nobody else will flourish because he needs mercy. But if everybody's too merciful, there won't be any strictness to get things done, and so on and so on and so on and so on. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wisdom is that the balance of this universe requires that people are different. It's a necessity. So how do you deal with your own intra-personal emotional intelligence, and how can you figure out people? Let's talk about our own selves today. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills, we have another congregation, we'll talk about how you can learn about the others. Because it's important to conquer yourself first before you can start talking to others. First of all, remember this acronym, ruler. And this is not something that I thought of. This is something I've learned from a very well-known person in the States who wrote a book about it called The Emotional Intelligence of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he made it in a very, very simple way for average Muslims to understand. First thing is, from the ruler acronym, is to recognize. Recognize your own emotional intelligence. And everybody is different. So you need to actually, dare I say it, even though it's very cliche, you need to actually sit down and think about yourself in the past and figure out, what am I inclined towards? Some people are adventurous. Some people are very soft. Some people are perfectionists. Some people are systematic. It has to be by the book. But everybody is unique, and that's how I like to pray to them. So you need to figure out yourself. You need to recognize, what are you emotionally? And once you recognize it, you go to the you, which is understanding yourself. So when you understand yourself, you'll be able to understand which areas of life you're able to benefit and which areas of life you'll be challenged. I'll give you some examples. Doctors, health professionals tend to be very systematic. Put them in a chaotic environment, they lose their mind. They can't function. Everything has to be in order. Everything has to be in a process kind of way. That's just the way they're hardwired. Where some people will thrive in organized chaos and they'll be able to manage, and so on and so on. Males, you can't function in the chaos environment that the women deal with the kids running around and the phone ringing and cooking and then auntie calling and this and that. They can multitask, we can single task. Women, men, so on and so on. Once you recognize what you are emotionally and you understand it, next thing is you have to label your emotions, which is the L in the acronym ruler. And they say in English psychology, if you cannot name it, you cannot tame it. I repeat, if you cannot name it, you cannot tame it. So when you go through different experiences in life and you have an emotion that comes to the surface and somebody asks you, what are you feeling right now? You cannot articulate a word. It's important to articulate. It's important to know how to articulate your emotions. Why? Because one of the biggest miracles of the message of Prophet ﷺ is specific articulation of context. Specific articulation of context. So when you read a hadith or when you study the Quran, the words that are used by Allah and Prophet ﷺ are very specific to the context. And by being specific to the context, you can understand it. But if they're general and vague, you can't understand it. So that's the miracle of Prophet ﷺ, that's a miracle of the Quran that Allah sent, but it's a message for us. In order to have clarity You need to label things and understand. Without clarity, you cannot figure out things. So you need to figure out, are you systematic? Are you emotional? Do you thrive in organized areas? Do you thrive in chaotic areas? Do you thrive in doing the work behind the scenes, or standing on the stage and speaking, or cooking, or whatever your skill set is that is given to you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You need to understand it and label it. And so when people ask you, what can you offer? You're able to articulate, this is me, brother, this, I'm good at such things. And then, but if somebody asks you, would you like to help? You're like, yeah, sure, I can help. What can you do? I don't know. You're not really of help in that situation, in that time, because you haven't articulated what your skill set is, what you're emotionally inclined to be better at. So recognizing yourself emotionally, understanding yourself emotionally, labeling it. E stands for expression, and R stands for regulation. Now this is the meaty bit that's specific to men and women as well. The expression of emotion is something very important for a human being. Expression of emotions is something very important to a human being. Naturally, where we are, women express emotions better than men, but sometimes they overexpress. Men, on the other hand, don't express enough. And so both genders need to figure out how we come to the right balance. Expression of emotion is important. Now we'll talk to men specifically, because the ladies have no problem expressing emotions. Men, like I talked about at the beginning, have this masculine philosophy where you're not allowed to express emotions. But Islam does not fight the natural things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in their way of life, they do not fight what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in you. They teach you how to channel it and use it in the right direction. I'll give you an example. Masculinity. You know, if something sad happens, you lose a job, a family person dies away, for whatever reason, you have to be like a robot and a zombie, and you can't even shed a tear. Okay? That's what's normal, apparently, these days. But let's compare to our role model, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Is any of us here tougher than him, or has had a rougher life than him? No, really. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as you know, he had male kids, but they all died. So whoever is a parent here, inshallah, you don't go through that experience, but just thinking about it destroyed me, having to bury my child. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not test us with that. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was tested with that. And he buried his last son, his name was Ibrahim. And when Ibrahim was being buried, Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam started to cry. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam started to cry. And the companions around him, sharing the same masculine philosophy that we have, were sort of surprised. As in, like, you are supposed to be the tough role model for us. And then this is when the prophetic touch of how to express your emotions was displayed by Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he said, Inna al-ayna la tadma'. Does anybody know the hadith? He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was bearing his son Ibrahim, Inna al-ayna la tadma' wa inna al-qalba la yahzan wa inna ala firaqika ya Ibrahim la hazinun, or kama qala sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then he said, وَلَا نَقُولُ إِلَّا مَا يُرْضِي اللَّهِ إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. So Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, listen here, men. He said, so he sends a message to everybody. The eye will cry and the heart will be sad. And we are sad for your departure, O Ibrahim. He's talking to his son, he's burying him. But then this is where the regulation comes up that makes you unique as a Muslim. The last acronym, the last letter of the acronym ruler is R, for regulation. Prophet ﷺ says, but we do not say anything except what Allah wants us to say. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. To Allah we belong and to Him we shall return. So the difference between what we're doing and what Prophet ﷺ is teaching us is you are supposed to express your emotions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, but you're supposed to regulate it with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordered. So we have two extremes. We have people who don't shed a tear when a family member passes away, and we have the other extreme where people lose their sanity. Oh Allah, why are you doing this to me? Why me? What have I done? You go from this to this. That's not correct, and that's not correct. Expression of emotion is normal, but you regulate it with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's commandments. And so the last 5 minutes today, if I was to summarize emotional intelligence in two things. Emotional intelligence is the ability to space out the time between a stimulus and a response. I'll repeat that. Emotional intelligence is your ability to space out and separate a stimulus from the response. Often, you are challenged in life and a situation happens, and at that moment of anger or frustration or wanting to retaliate, that moment is when your emotional intelligence kicks in. That's your scale of emotional intelligence. If you're a person that is animalistically reactive and just react like that, understand that your emotional intelligence is not where it should be. Prophet ﷺ was miraculously able to separate the stimulus and the response, almost like slow it down time. As in, you see something that pisses you off and you want to react, but then what's the last R stand for? Your regulation kicks in. Your regulation kicks in. And now the word regulation, how can you regulate your emotion? How is that tied to fasting? What do you need to have in your heart? What's the GC? Taqwa, God consciousness. You can only be emotionally intelligent and regulate your emotions if you have God consciousness in your heart. Taqwa. And that's how miraculously Islam is linked between the spirituality and living your life. So the closer you are to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the better human being you become, because you're able to regulate how you live your life. So, for example, I'll give you some examples from the time of Prophet ﷺ. You know, we all know the story of when at the time of Prophet ﷺ, a big one came in and urinated in the corner of the masjid. Now, let's look at this scenario. If we have somebody, let's just say a redhead walks through the door and just urinates in the corner here. How many people will be able to help themselves? I'll put my hand up and say, I'll struggle to help myself. Now, that was the masjid of Prophet ﷺ, and the guy came in and urinated in the corner. The companions, like all of us, you haven't started to develop that amazing emotional intelligence that they will eventually get from Prophet ﷺ. And they reacted. You know, they all jumped and they wanted to give him a good old beating. Prophet ﷺ he was able to separate the stimulus from the response. He calmed them down. He told them, wait till he finishes his business and lead him. It's not like, please stop, go finish your business outside. No, it's like, let him finish his business. And once he's done, he took him outside and they told the companions to clean the corner. And then he spoke to him in a nice manner. This is a house of worship. We don't do these things in here. We have other places for this, and so on and so on. What do you think happened to that man? What do you think happened to that man if the reaction was, let's go and beat him up? He will never think about Islam again, ever. But the emotional intelligence of Prophet ﷺ puts himself in the place of that person that you're dealing with. You know, you might come across people in life where they snap at you, they say something inappropriate. Don't always take it personal, because I don't know, you don't know what that person has been through that day. You don't know. You don't know how much trouble your wife or your spouse or your kid has faced, and at the end of the day they look snappy and tired. And you expect them to treat you like a queen, or the wife expects the husband to look like a king, like Prince Charming, when he's had 10 hours at work in the factory dealing with wogs and this and that. You know? You have to understand the context of the human being in front of you in order to be emotionally intelligent. And so, takeaway for today, and if Allah wills, we'll have another time, is try and separate the time between stimulus and response. And right now in Ramadan, this is what fasting enables you to do. This is what fasting commands you to do. Control your tongue, don't retaliate, so on and so on and so on and so on. Emotional intelligence. If you can actually make that a principle in your life, you will unlock the hearts of so many people. So many people. I want to talk more, but I better stop because it's been 30 minutes already. So if Allah wills, we'll carry on this topic. Inshallah, I've given you a little appetizer. We will carry on if Allah wills, inshallah, in the future. If there's any questions, we'll open the floor for questions.
Jazakumullah khair, Ustaz Bakr or Assaud. I think there's so many insightful ideas from your presentation tonight in regard to the emotional intelligence. Okay, I think I'm going to give to the floor 3 questions. If you want to ask question or clarify or want to follow up with something that is still not clear from the presentation. Anyone have a question from you? Okay. You have a question?
Yeah. The professor. I like him. He always gets the ball going. That's good. He's there.
So if I'm in an argument on someone in the topic,
yeah,
how should I respond to the other person in an argument?
That's good. That's a valid question.
Yeah.
Okay. So that applies to kids, adults, male, female, young, old. How do you respond in arguments? In Islam, the prophetic teaching is that you want the truth to be the winner. You want the truth to be the winner, not necessarily yourself or the person in front of you. Now, in order for you to enable the truth to come out, you have to be calm. And in order for you to be calm, you have to let go of your arrogance and your ego and your pride. So step number 1, to have a successful outcome to a discussion rather than an argument, is can you drop your ego, your pride, your arrogance? Because one thing for sure is that if you have an argument with your ego and your pride and your arrogance in control, you won't be able to listen to the person. It could be that you are false on what you're saying. Nobody is Kamil. Nobody's perfect to us. Nobody has complete knowledge of anything at all. Neither me, neither you, neither the Imam of Mecca or Medina. None of us are ma'soom. We all have shortcomings. That doesn't mean that you're a sinner. It doesn't mean you could be shortcomings in terms of knowledge about a particular issue or context or incident. And so if you have an argument with someone, take the time to listen and make sure that the truth is the winner, not you nor them. That's your principle. The other person could be arrogant, prideful, doesn't go and fall to their level. If you don't know what you're talking about, it's better to stay quiet. Why? Because Prophet ﷺ had said, what is the famous hadith? Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawm al-akhir. Whoever believes in Allah and the day of judgment, what do you think he will say? Oh, look, pray rak'at at night every night, fast 50 days, 60 days? No. He says, Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawm al-akhir falyaqul khayran aw liyasmut. They should say something good or keep quiet. Yasmut is a very polite Arabic way of saying shut up. Very, very polite. Yeah. Yeah.
So if we're in an argument, we have to always be polite and logical.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's not about you or your ego winning, or it's not about him or his ego winning. It's about finding out the truth about what you're discussing. You could be right, you could be wrong. Now, if you're wrong about what you're saying, letting go of your ego and your pride allows you to accept the truth. But let's say you're right. Let's say what you're saying is right and the other person is wrong. You want to deliver a message to them, correct? You want to change their opinion about something?
Yeah.
So in order to do that, first and foremost, you got to win their heart. First and foremost, you got to win their heart. So it's not about you delivering your point across and the other person is still angry and upset. There's no point. There's no reception. Is that right? There's no reception. The phone won't work. There's no reception when the other person is arguing with you. It's almost like I got to turn on the reception so they can receive the data. And you do that by being polite, by being respectful. And when they see that you're not out there to prove a point, you want to do something that's good for them, people will accept that. Because no one here will not accept something that's good for them. You know? We'll take on the advice to fast. That's fine. We can do it or we cannot do it, but at least we'll accept it. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay? Inshallah, when you grow up, you'll understand that principle. But it applies to all of us.
Okay, thank you. Next one, maybe from sisters, if you have a question. You're tired to sisters. And what about the girls at the back? Is any question? So no question. It's no more question from
This brother.
Oh, okay, right.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
It's a very interesting topic today.
Sorry?
Very interesting topic.
Okay.
So, I have a question because I feel I'm the one that in opposite of the intelligence thing from the emotion. I have a relative that who is from my wife who is easy to cry with some situation. But I'm beyond that. I'm opposite that direction. So how to improve the emotional intelligence? I mean, do you have any practical step by step or because I feel that I never find this situation that because I'm very logical people. I've been growing from kids until grow up. It's a very calculation maybe, and then I feel that some situation like as let's say if my wife is crying, I'm not crying. I'm said, why are you crying? And something like that. So do you have any, if you could explain how to improve that one, and or do you have any the practical suggestion for that? Thanks.
One of the brother is asking that his natural inquisition is very logical. And I can relate to that because I've lived in a family where we have family members who are very logical, and I'm not being disrespectful, but sometimes they can come across as being cold-hearted, where they don't resonate with the other person. Again, I always refer back to our example who is Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You cannot be a one-page script in life. You cannot be. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to change your own personality to be like others in order to fit in, but it's very important for a Muslim to recognize what the other person is going through. That's very important, because one of the most important tools of emotional intelligence, like you asking, which I will say next time, is empathy. Empathy is the ability to see what the person is going through and offer something to show that you care. It could be something very simple. So for example, often the wives get very emotional and get upset over things that men don't understand. We won't understand why they're getting upset, why they're getting emotional. And by default, because we don't understand, we don't show emotional support to the sisters. And that leads to having friction sometimes. Now, the example that we refer to is not masculinity in our culture, but Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. What did Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam say? خيركم لأهله وأنا خيركم لأهله. He is the best to his family. And the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in other hadith will say, Aisha, I know when you're upset with me, and I know when you're angry with me. And Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and Aisha radiallahu anha used to have this simile called the knots between them. So sometimes, as a human being, Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is documented to have arguments with Aisha. And then when he goes away, he'll ask, oh, Aisha, how is the knot? Is it tight or is it loose? And she would say, it's loose. And then he would make up with her, and how is the knot now? And she goes, it's tight. And so on and so on. So even when there's an argument between a husband and wife, you recognize that either the person is upset. You have to be able to recognize. If you are just cold-hearted to just your own way of thinking, that leads to problems down the line because you're not able to relate to others. Now, I'm not saying that you have to be soft. And just because the other person is crying, you have to show recognition by you crying as well. That's not what I'm saying. The recognition is just to understand what they're going through and show something. And there could be just very, very simple gestures. I'll give you some examples. You know, Prophet ﷺ is sometimes too high an example for us. So let's talk about some normal human beings. I'm not sure if I've mentioned to you guys here or not, but one of the victims in the Christchurch terrorist attack was a very close friend of mine. We had a few people that we know, but this guy was the closest that I knew. And we spent time together in the national team. He was the goalkeeper for New Zealand, and I was a player in the national team. And so as both Muslims, we would be roomed together because they know that we have to get up and pray Fajr together. So they wouldn't put us with the non-Muslims because we didn't want to upset them and wake them up at 4:30 or 5:30 or whatever. So they understood that. Anyway, when this brother passed away, there were so many gestures that came to show recognition for him, above and beyond all the other martyrs. And all the other martyrs have their own stories on their own journeys and so on, but I know this person. But what shook us the most was how many stories came from non-Muslims. How many stories came from non-Muslims? And this guy was the eldest son. This guy was newly married. This guy had a 2-year-old. This guy was just starting his own software company, so entrepreneur. And all these things just take up so much time in a normal person's life. How did he touch the lives of so many other people? We were shocked. We were his close friends and we were shocked. Why is this Hindu guy and this guy and that guy all, they flew down to Christchurch and attended the burial. Guys, can you please listen? And so we started asking these non-Muslims, you know, his name was Ata Al-Ayan, may Allah have mercy on him. What did he do to you guys to win your affection like that? What did he do? And they all said the same story, is that Ata did not do something extraordinary. But through their encounters, there were moments where they were going through some sort of difficulty, and Ata recognized it and just gave a little gesture. And I'll give you some examples. In the national team, as you know, in a sports setting, in a team you'll have experienced players and you have young comers, up and coming. They have a lot of talent, but they don't have experience. So at one stage, we had a team that was sort of 50% experienced players, myself and Ata being some of the experienced players, and we had some new players coming through. One of these players at that time was only 15, 16. So in soccer, he was a trickster, full of tricks, full of speed, full of energy, but no experience. So some games, these tricks will come handy and they will lead to goals and opportunities. And in some games, they will lead to bad outcomes for us as such. And so in one of these games, this guy's name was Elliot. It was against Australia, ironically. He was trying his best, but the Australian defense was very experienced and they were able to pick the ball from him and we conceded a few goals. So this young teenager who was trying his best for his country was down, feeling very down. The response from our team, a lot of players were upset with him because he was doing things that are outside what was being prescribed by the coach, except Ata. Ata just went and tapped his shoulder. This is the gesture. Tapped his shoulder and he said, look, we know you're trying your best. Sometimes it works out. Sometimes it doesn't. But keep trying and eventually you will break through. That's all he said to him. It was like something in the tunnel. And that's it. Ironically, that was the last time that guy played in the national team, not Ata, the young guy, and we never heard from him again until Ata passed away 7 years later. But in those 7 years, this player had excelled so much in soccer that he is now playing professionally in the States. And so when he heard that Ata passed away, nobody asked him to. He wore the black armband and he wrote a huge article saying how much that little gesture resonated with him and still resonates with him to that day. That little tap on the shoulder. So this is what I mean. You will come on the day of judgment and you will see some deeds, you will see some rewards waiting for you and you didn't know where they came from. And so Prophet ﷺ says that on the day of judgment, you will go and see that there are some deeds that have given you huge rewards, but they're not in your expectation, between brackets. You know, it wasn't praying a whole night or fasting 30 days. You just helped that person there. You just showed a smile there. You showed care there. But in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those things are huge. Those things are huge. So the human empathy, which is a huge tool of emotional intelligence, is a huge avenue for reward for you as a Muslim. Huge avenue. We just don't think about it, but it's there. And Prophet ﷺ did it, and he's encouraged us to do it. But we choose not to pay attention to these things. I don't know why. We should, because dare I say, it's easy money. It's very easy money. But it requires you to just be patient with people. And we don't want to be patient with people, or we don't want to change and listen to the hearts of other people, because we just want to be in our own comfortable bubble. We want people to be like us, and that's easier. That's easier. But like we said last week in the talk, when Allah said, "Yuridu Allahu bikum al-yusra wa la yuridu bikum al-usra," the philosophy and the principle in this life is that you have to struggle a little bit to get the bigger rewards. And part of that is struggling in your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And part of it is just pushing through the struggles that you'll have with human beings. I hope that answers the question. Apart from the philosopher.
Okay, I think if you don't have one more question, you still have
if the audience are happy, I'm happy to answer. Tomorrow is a public holiday, right? Or are people working?
It's a public holiday.
Khalas.
Okay, I think there is a last question. Maybe a question from anyone as well, if you don't mind.
Okay.
It's not really a question.
No problem.
It's like a personality test called the MBTI test.
Yeah.
It's really accurate on knowing what we are.
Yeah.
Like our personality is so accurate. It's like 5 criterias.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. So do you encourage people to do these personality tests?
Sort of.
Yeah, why not? Yep. The professor has alluded to actually a practical tool. All the corporate companies, anybody who's working in corporate companies, the first thing they'll do to figure out your skill set, because they know that people haven't actually figured out themselves, is they run you through these questionnaires. And from the answers, they'll figure out what your skill set is, and they will assign you to the correct department that is suited for your skill set. So yeah, these tools are available, and they're very accurate to a degree about giving you a general picture, whether you're a yellow person, green person, blue person, red person, so on and so on and so on. And it's good to know these things, because when you go to work and you encounter other people, you can sort of generally say, oh, this person is this person is that. He's majority this, he's majority red, he's majority green. So I need to know how I deal with them in conflict and leadership and so on. These tools are very, very handy. Yeah. Thank you, Professor. That's actually very good.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think my question actually you already touched it. So in school in Australia, especially in primary setting, the school introduced a framework called regulation. So as you said, that was like based on the color, so red, yellow, green, and blue.
Okay.
So blue zone, red zone, green zone. So green zone means if you are ready to go or stay focused, and red zone if you are agitated or angry, and yellow zone if you like being silly, and then blue zone if you feel like tired. And they develop a lot of tools how to deal with that color. And my question is, from your point of view, do you think this kind of thing is aligned with the Islamic point of view?
The question is very similar to the professor. Is that these tools that are out there that sort of systematically group you into personality types?
Yeah.
For a Muslim, it's important to understand that these tools help, but they're not the end game. And these personality things are not bulletproof, because the human being is a lot more complex than being grouped into one category. You are very, very, I can't use the word fluid, because that's been used for the wrong things these days. But you can actually adapt. The beauty of the Muslim is that once he's able to regulate his emotions, despite his predisposition characteristics. So every single one of us has got some sort of predisposition characteristic that are unique to us. Like I said, you could be systematic, you could be logical, you could be emotional, and so on. But the Muslim is through his knowledge of the Prophet ﷺ and living your life as a Muslim and the ability to relate to other humans, you are able to adapt and regulate your emotions according to the scenario in front of you. And that's the key. Because these corporate tools, one downside of it is that you become always rigid, and that you are predominantly red, or you are predominantly green, you are predominantly yellow, you are predominantly blue. So you start looking to people in the other categories as aliens, and you can't work with them. And and there's like, oh my God, I hope he's not a yellow, I'm a red, we're gonna clash. This is the issue with these tools. Whereas as a Muslim, it's about figuring out yourself. And once you figure out yourself, you know what the others are like. And then your taqwa, your God consciousness, regulates how you interact with them. So it's almost like you have the upper hand. Because people who fall into this subcategorization, they become like a cult. They only know them and their circle, and that's it. They can't interact with the others. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ. Who knows the verse? وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's purpose in this world is He's created human beings in different tribes and different nationalities and different ethnicities so that you get to know each other. No, not that so we segregate and live our own little pockets. That applies on a national level, at a community level, and at an individual level as well. That answers the question?
Yes. Okay, I think if no more question, then I think we're going to end up our program tonight. And I think I couldn't summarize what you are talking about tonight. I only highlight 3 key points here. So the first one is the importance of our presence in a conscious way, especially when we're doing ibadah and we know our intention. The second one is not enough if you only have a book smart, but also you need to have what we call people smart and social smart as well, especially how to make a relationship and interact or influence other people as well. And the last one is the importance of recognizing yourself emotionally. Understand it and elaborate it.
And the last point is make sure you practice separating the stimulus from the response.
And this last one, with one day, just you need to know about the stimulus and response. Yeah.
Separate the two.
Okay. And then thank you very much, Brother Bakr, for your message tonight. I think it's so insightful, and hopefully in the future we can hear again.
Inshallah.
And we're gonna close our majlis tonight by reading doa kafaratul masjid. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika asyhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah.